Welcome to Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news, trends, and hottest topics that focus on advances in cybersecurity and cyber industry economics. Our expert yet down-to-earth hosts make cybersecurity straightforward. They ask the tough questions and make this challenging topic something that everyone can understand. Our candid approach lets guests open up on topics we would all like to see addressed. You can find us on the web at newcyberfrontier.com. That's www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join today's host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today, guest Jerod Brennen with SailPoint and is basically an identity strategy and solutions advisor. So this is really good because I don't think I've ever had anybody come in with your depth of identity experience and kind of give a high level, first of all, on identities, but then some more details on how identities are managed. But Jerod, welcome today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for letting me come on the show. I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk about this stuff, so thank you. Definitely.
So Jerod, you had an interesting background. I want you to tell us how you got to the point of where you work and that band director background or music teacher was it? But tell us your background. How do you got to where you're at?
Sure. I went to college to be a music teacher. I was studying both band and vocal. I settled on vocal. I'm afraid I'm not going to sing any for you today, but maybe a little bit of whiskey in me. It's a different conversation. But when I graduated, I found that as much as I love teaching, I did want to go into the public schools. I wanted to do something else. I've always been a nerd. So I looked around for some opportunities and I started actually putting computers together, physically assembling computers, and then taking them out to set them up for training classes. And I was hungry to learn more. I'd never really focused on that topic. So I got a couple of certifications, left that job for a help desk job, moved from there into public utilities as an IT analyst. And that's where I had a chance internally to get into information security for the first time, which that was critical national infrastructure. All the people I worked with were ex-military. So there was a very strict approach to security, right? If we screwed up, people could get hurt, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody gets into a nuclear reactor, that's really bad. And I made a move, though, from that company to a retailer who at $4 billion in annual revenue, I was the first security person they ever hired. And they wanted me to figure out security, not as a protection necessarily, but because their bank said, if you don't figure the security thing out, we're going to charge you a higher interest rate on your or your transaction fee on all your credit card transactions. And given the number of credit card transactions, it made more sense to hire somebody to come in and do security. So I spent a lot of time there just rolling up my sleeves and figuring out everything from encryption, desktops to databases. That's where I got into identity, where we rolled out an identity program for hundreds of thousands of employees. Mm-hmm. And then I had learned enough that I could go into consulting and teach other people, which brings me kind of full circle to the teaching thing. I could go into organizations who are trying to figure this stuff out and share that experience, share that knowledge, and help them accelerate their own plans as a business. And an opportunity came up for me to go into higher ed for a few years, which I loved. I did a lot of risk management of third-party relationships. Started to build an internal red team, a team of ethical hackers who would hack the university from the inside so they could show the people where to tighten their controls. That was based on some of the penetration testing I did while I was consulting. And then a move back into consulting led me to the role I'm in today, which is providing those advisory services, but from a vendor side. The company I'm with, SailPoint, makes a technology that helps organizations do all of this identity stuff.
Hmm.
And to be able to connect all the dots and to talk about how this stuff works in the real world is something that I found the people I work with, the customers especially, really appreciate. And so the company is um, gracious enough to let me keep doing the teaching thing as part of my job.
Interesting. So we're going to take a break here from our sponsors. We'll be right back to talk to Jerod some more. Hold on.
Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. We're talking with Jerod Brennen on identity management and the big picture there. So you gave us a little bit about your background. Started in teaching for music, and then you also do screenplay writing.
Yeah, oh yes. Writing is my passion. Telling stories is just, it's a magical thing to me. And anybody who's seen me at a conference or any of the professional meetings where I go out, they know that I've got laundry lists of stories around this space. But yeah, I've shot a handful of short films, written a couple of features, still working on selling one, but haven't found that buyer yet. And I'm fortunate that I live in Columbus, Ohio, and there's actually a thriving independent filmmaking community here. A little trivia, I actually appear as a zombie in the indie hit Bong of the Living Dead, which is a zombie stoner comedy that you can catch on a couple of streaming services. And I am responsible for the death of a main character. So it was time well spent.
Interesting. So oftentimes we find in this industry, it's the people with unique skills from a total tangent direction are really, good at moving the compass in cybersecurity in a particular direction. How do you feel that background, a diverse, more artistic or liberal arts, has even increased your ability to do what you do?
The traditional approach of there's a set of controls and I want to demonstrate that we comply with these controls, right? The very technical thinking is a crucial part of the security practice. If you want an organization to be protected from both intentional attacks from cyber criminals and unintentional attacks, which an event like a tornado or a flood or a hosting provider who suddenly files for bankruptcy. There's a series of controls that you can find in any number of frameworks that will give you that foundation. But cyber criminals don't limit themselves to only the things on the list. They tend to be creative and innovative, and because they're highly motivated to get at whatever they're going after, whether it's a state-sponsored attack going after national infrastructure, state secrets, or whether it's a financially motivated attack to get you to give up the credentials to your bank account, right? Whatever the thing is, they're not going to look at somebody who's compliant and say, well, shucks, I can't attack these people. And coming from a more creative background, I get to think like a cyber criminal. I get to apply that creative thinking to how we do what we do. And it also enables me to get up from behind my desk and talk to people who also don't have a technical background. I mean, like I said, I was playing around with programming in BASIC on an Apple IIe when I was in elementary school. So I'm flying my nerd flag high here. But if I were to sit down with somebody who hates the fact that they have to use a login and password to do their job, period, I could have a conversation with them about what it is and why it's important, because I don't speak in acronyms. I don't fall into the trap of being so overly technical that I miss a connection with the audience. And I've worked with a lot of technical people over the years who have both skills, but I found that within the information security field, there's a broad set of experiences that people are bringing that are non-technical, that have contributed to some of these innovations, to creative ways of solving these problems.
Yeah, I think that hits the mark pretty well, and it's a good thing to have people that might be non-technical listening to hear that and say, yeah, there is a place for me, and a lot
Oh,
of times
absolutely.
those people are the people we need the most, like yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we step back and said, okay, identities, we want to understand identity. It's a password, a logon, right? Is it more complex than that? Tell us about how this weaves through the whole business structure.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because identity really started out, this idea in the technical space, as being a username and a password. But I saw a report that LastPass published. It's been within the last couple of years. They have the password vault where you can keep all your passwords, and on average today, the average, like, end user, not business people, but end users using their product, have nearly 200 different usernames and passwords for logging into your social media account, your bank account, your email, all the things you do online. You have different usernames and passwords, but at the end of the day, your identity is you. You're one person. Now that one to many relationship is where some of the complexity comes into play, especially in the enterprise. Because when I start to work with an organization, when I joined SailPoint, they said, okay, this is Jerod, this is one person, this is his identity, but Jerod needs all these accounts in order to do his job. So we use our own technology internally. So they say Jerod's going to work on this team. They click a button, and then it goes out and sets up all those accounts. But more importantly, it keeps track that they all belong to me. Because if my relationship changes within the organization, if I get promoted, if I move to a different team, then someone needs to go out and take away the stuff I don't need anymore,
Mm-hmm.
but give me the things that I need for the new role. And then ultimately, somebody needs to step back and look and say, is all of this appropriate, right? Are we giving Jerod the right amount of access to do his job, or are we over entitling him? Are we giving him too much information? And I know that when I look at the Office of Personnel Management, there was a hack that impacted anybody who'd gone through clearance, the process of getting clearance in the U.S. federal government. The individual that they found to be like his account at the core of that attack had access to data that he didn't need in order to do his job. And you have, I don't know how many thousands of people and their family members who've been impacted, all because this one identity and the accounts associated with that identity was inappropriate, right? It wasn't being appropriately governed. So yeah, the notion of what identity is in both the personal space and the enterprise space is it's kind of complex, right? I mean, there are a lot of moving parts, but ultimately it's that one to many relationship of you're one person, flesh and blood, and you have many accounts that each account has different permissions or entitlements, and all of that together enables you to do what you're trying to do.
How many, if you look at most businesses, how many accounts are we talking about? Some stats?
On the business side, if I'm looking at 181, it does depend on the size of the business. I know one of the things that we do at our company, we help people with what's called role-based access controls, where you
Mm-hmm.
look at what the business role is, what were you hired to do, and then you start to map that role to all the things that you should have access to. And I have organizations I work with that have thousands of roles, and each one of those roles has hundreds of different entitlements and account relationships. So I don't have any stats like direct that I could share from like a published report, but just
Mm-hmm.
from my own experience, it's not uncommon for, hundreds of accounts to be associated with one person. But again, I come from an IT background. If I'm talking to people in a Linux environment, or people who have privileged accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Accounts that have control over applications or systems. In an environment where I have 1,000 Linux servers, if I've got an account on every one of those servers, suddenly I've got 1,000 accounts that map back to my identity.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can get really, really complex really quickly.
Yeah. Let's take a break here from our sponsors. We'll be right back after this message. Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. On here today, talking to Jerod Brennen from SailPoint about identity management, building identity. And now, if I had to dig down and say, it's hard to find a company now that doesn't have technological all kinds of identities, passwords. But let's say we go into a company that has never really taken control of managing it. How would you build that from the ground up? I know you said you had an example of doing this in a pretty high profile corporation.
Yeah, in that retail space. Yeah, I learned a lot back then, and in the role that I'm in now too, I get to tap into other people who've done similar things. And the very first thing that organizations should do is it comes out of what Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? Seek first to understand. You need to get out from behind your desk and talk to people and just figure out how all of this stuff works. There's you're going to have applications on premise. You're going to have multiple directories, databases, all of these things that have accounts. You have an HR department that is onboarding new employees, but then you also have some process for onboarding contractors and third-party suppliers. And so the first step is to understand, what do these processes look like? And then what systems and applications do they touch? And once you have that knowledge, you can start to centralize everything in like a data lake, or not data lake, like a warehouse, an identity warehouse, where you say all of these accounts map back to this one person. And even like an HR system isn't necessarily that one authoritative source. An Active Directory isn't the source. An Azure AD isn't that source, right? They're all accounts. You need something that is a layer abstracted that says, this is your foundation. Mm-hmm. And then once you have that foundation in place, you can start connecting it to all the targets that you want to manage. And you say, okay, bring me all of the Active Directory accounts and group memberships. Bring me all the SAP accounts and entitlements. Bring me all the AWS accounts. I want all of that data in one place that I can start to shape it and mold it.
So
and then you can,
in your example of doing this, did they have that together already? Or was it just like nothing?
Every organization I've ever worked with has grown organically. So over time, they've just decided, hey, the business is growing. Wouldn't it be helpful if we had this technology to help us do what we're doing bigger, better, faster? And once they get to the point that you've described of, okay, I've got all these things everywhere. Now I need to manage. And more importantly, I need to govern. I need to make sure that we're following rules that are going to position us for that next plateau, that next tier of growth. Then going out and looking for a way to connect all those pieces. That's kind of the step I have in mind here. That's the process. That's what that identity warehouse does. It connects all the dots. And once they've got that data in the identity warehouse, then they can start to do things like birthright provisioning to say, well, now that I can see everybody in the company needs an Active Directory account, can I automate the human resources to Active Directory feed that as soon as their hire date starts, it just creates their account? Mm-hmm. I don't need somebody on the help desk to go in and do that manually. The help desk has more important things to do than a repetitive task like that. let me enable them to be more engaged with our customers and handle more complex issues. And I'll automate this every time somebody hires because I know they need that. And oh, they also need an email account, and they also need this benefits so they can get into the benefits system, right? So that birthright provisioning tends to be the next step. And then you let people start asking for things that they need on top of their birthrights. We call that like an access request process, whether it's through a ticketing system, or they can sometimes go to that identity warehouse directly and say, hey, can I have this access as well? And as organizations begin to collect that data, then it starts to coalesce into these patterns that you can say, well, everybody in accounting is asking for these 10 things. So in addition to the birthright stuff that everybody gets, if HR tells me they work in accounting, I'm automatically going to give them these 10 things as a role, a business or enterprise role. And then from there, you can start to do more complex things where you get into like leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to go out and look across your entire enterprise for patterns that maybe you haven't found yet. Come back to you and say, hey, I think that this is another role you might want to turn on. What do you think? And then giving you the opportunity as a human to make the interpretation and make changes. It's kind of like stacking a pyramid, right? You're building each layer on a foundational layer beneath it, but it's important to make sure that that foundation is solid, right? If you try to build an inverted pyramid or you don't take time to stabilize, you're going to get a couple of layers up and things are just going to come crashing down.
So now, a lot of us get into penetration testing. I think you have done this as well. You go in, you get to see where the main problems are, where people fail at this. What kind of advice would you give from seeing, where people fail, where companies fall short?
Yeah. So when I was consulting, I actually, I kept seeing the same things over and over again. And I put together a framework designed for small and medium enterprises to kind of serve as a foundation. I call it the common sense security framework. And one of the things that even to this day stands out as something we don't do well is password management and credential management, right? If I'm Jerod, right, that one person, and I go to Active Directory and there's a password policy that says it has to be at least 8 characters long, uppercase, lowercase, special character numbers. Some of this stuff comes straight out of compliance, like the payment card industries, the National Institute of Standards. They've changed their stuff to be a little more reasonable. But attackers can look at that and say, well, what kind of pattern would somebody use today that I might be able to guess? I might be able to get into their account. And so, I mean, like right now, I might use like fall 2020 exclamation point, capital FALL 2020 exclamation point as a password, right? That's going to meet all those complexity requirements. And it's going to be something that an end user can remember without too much complexity, right? They don't have to write that one down to remember. They just have to look out the window. Well, attackers know that too. So there are tools that attackers use for a technique. It's called password spraying, where they pick one password that they think a company is using, at least somebody in the company is using. And then they try to log into every account at that company using that one password. And all they have to do is get in once. And if they find one set of credentials that works, then they're going to try to log into something like email or VPN. And if they can get in from there, then they could just keep digging and try to get further and further until this is a pen testing language, right? Privilege escalation and lateral movement. They're going to try to find another account that has more permissions than theirs, and they're going to try to jump to another system or application. All of that comes back to weak credential management. It's, a password that could have been stronger, or an account without 2-factor authentication. right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a token, even an app like Google Authenticator, which I use for all my like social media and email and everything, right? It's a little 6-digit number that I have, but the attackers don't, right? It's something like that would make such a huge difference if you just turned on multi-factor for the accounts that you're worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the history of data breaches, there's a website called privacyrights.org that has a chronology of data breaches dating back to 2005, a database of all these databases. It's not been updated within the past year or so, but there's a treasure trove of data. If you look at these data breaches, you'll find that there's a credential compromise in virtually every single one. The one exception being if somebody left backup tape in the back of their car and it got stolen out of their apartment complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to log in to bust your car window. But if you look at any technical breach that's resulted in data being stolen from an internal network, it's always because somebody got a set of credentials and then they use those credentials to get privileged credentials. And better credential management shuts the attackers down. It makes it harder for them to be successful and gives the defenders more time to see what's happening, right? And to say, hey, this looks funny. You know, Jerod doesn't normally log in at 3 a.m. from the Ukraine to try to do his job. Is this really Jerod, right? You want the defenders to have time to see that kind of stuff, and you do that by front loading the login process with some more complexity. Understanding that if you overload your users, they're going to find a way around it too. If you make it too hard for them to do their job, you're doing the attacker's work for them, right? You're bringing your business to its knees.
Yeah.
So you got to be reasonable, but there's a balance to be struck.
Yeah. So now, we talked about business a lot, but we as individuals are also, we have to be concerned with this, and we have to think about
Absolutely.
management. I have like a 20-page document I keep with just all the links I have accounts to, not my passwords or anything, but just all the links, so I know how many accounts I have from the last 20 years. And if I had a frequent flyer number with airlines I haven't flown on in 10 years, it's back in that list somewhere. Things like that. But that's my management, which has been very manual, and I've just been very kind of particular about keeping that up. But how would you portray this, this tasking, or give advice to somebody as a consumer or just a user of their own managing of their own credential?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, I had something happen to me. I have a couple of social media accounts on different networks, some for websites that I keep active to help people do their own career stuff. And somebody actually got into one of my accounts once. It was a weak password that I hadn't updated, and I know I had a chance to teach my daughter about kind of managing social media, and just as we were making dinner when it happened. So it was, let's step away from the stove and change this, and here's what we did. But what I have done, and some of the things I showed her, I use a password vault. So I mentioned LastPass. I actually use their free plugin in Google Chrome to keep track of all my passwords. And instead of reusing the same password on different websites, I let it give me a random password that's not that 8 characters, it's 20 characters and messy, and there's no way I'd ever remember it. And in addition to using a password manager so that I don't have to remember those passwords, for my email account, my bank account, my social media account, I always turn on 2-factor authentication, because attackers are going to send you emails that say things like, hey, if you click here, I'll give you a $500 gift card, but I've only got 10 left, so make sure you do it quickly, right? They'll put together these attacks that try to get people to take an action before they really think through, is this legit? And those types of attacks are designed to get credentials, right? To get you to share the information that an attacker would use to compromise your identity and everything your identity has access to. So in addition to some of those preventative controls like a password safe and multi-factor and never reusing passwords. Just some security awareness training, which I know every company on the planet is offering some sort of training at this point to help people understand what these social engineering attacks look like and how to detect them and what to do when you see them. Mm-hmm. Look for those opportunities to take some of that training and to share what you've learned with your friends and your family, right? Make it a community effort instead of waiting on somebody to come tell you how to do that security stuff.
Yeah, this has been really interesting and good to hear that from the perspective of how it all comes together. As we kind of wrap up here, I know you work for SailPoint. Tell us about what they do, how people can get in touch with them, what products you might want to show them, things like that.
Sure. SailPoint is an identity governance and administration software vendor. So automating that entire, we call it the joiner, mover, leaver life cycle of when an identity is created and how it changes over time, and then when it ends its relationship with the organization, and you have to manage all those accounts. SailPoint automates all of that for on-premise applications, for applications in the cloud, like logging into things like Gmail, right, or Facebook, right, managing all the accounts for those websites, and even accounts for cloud service, infrastructure as a service providers like AWS and Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud Platform. And the cool thing that the nerd in me really loves about this is SailPoint leverages artificial intelligence and machine learning to do some of that analysis above and beyond what, you would need an entire team of data analysts just combing through this data and trying to find patterns. And even then, they still wouldn't be able to come up with the recommendations as quickly as the platform is to say, maybe you should turn this off, or maybe you could automate this activity over here. So it's a pretty robust platform that enables organizations to figure this identity governance thing out and to automate that activity in a way that enables you to focus on what you're in business to do in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. As you're trying to deliver the services or the goods that your customers depend on, and enable your employees to do the things you hired them to do, right? Be creative, be innovative, right? You can use the SailPoint platform to take all that busy work off their plate and just enable people to be able to do their jobs.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on today, Jerod, and we'll have to do this again another time. But thanks for joining.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to New Cyber Frontier. Remember to follow or like our post and circulate each new show to your networks. We keep you informed, bring you the latest news, explore new trends, and find the hottest topics. With New Cyber Frontier, you don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert. Just get plugged in. We encourage you to get involved. Tell us what topics interest you and join our mailing lists. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. That's newcyberfrontier.com. Check out our previous interviews and please let us know if there are any topics that you would like to hear discussed. See you next time on New Cyber Frontier.